From WKNOW, this is Steve Chanley with One Question Too Many. Today's guest will be attorney and author Aubria Ralph, the founder of Scrappy Girl Project in New York, which provides training on leadership growth, development, and strategies for healthful and sustainable leadership careers. Today's programming is made possible by the law firm of Employer Advocates Group, serving California employers since 2002, with offices in Orange County and San Luis Obispo County, California. eaglawgroup.com. We're joined today by Aubria Ralph, the founder of Scrappy Girl Project. How are you today, Aubria?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well, thanks for asking. When did you launch your company?
I launched it October 25th, 2023.
Are you located in New York State?
Yes, I'm in New York City and Long Island.
So when you started your business, did you launch it from scratch as a startup?
Yeah. I didn't have a consulting business prior to that, but I had been giving a lot of free and ultimately valuable advice to people for quite some time. And so it was an opportunity for me to monetize something that I'd already been doing. And so in essence, yes, it was a startup, but I funded my business.
It's at least one thing about you that really separates you from most of the guests on this show, and that's the fact that you're a successful children's book author. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. So in 2015, one of my friends at the time had an idea that like it would be cool if we were friends when we were kids, but we met like after college. So it was like impossible. But even though like I kind of made fun of that person, I ended up thinking about it later and had the idea to create this childhood of me and this person. So Adventures of Boo and Chin were born. And so they're based on myself and my friend SJ. But what's really funny about it is I have 13 godkids and I ended up doing composites of both of the characters just from hanging out with my goddaughters and godsons and kind of seeing the things that they're into. And so I came up with the childhoods based on them more so than us.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Do you plan on writing more children's books in the future?
Definitely. If I ever try not to, I have one of my godsons, the first one, Garrison. He will keep me honest because every time he sees me, he says, Auntie Aubria, when do you think the next book's going to come out? Because apparently having 7 books out and an anthology in 1 year is just not enough. And so eventually, but I think we're going to shift to chapter books because I want to give Boo and Chin some time and then I want to do middle school life. And by the time I'm ready, some of my godchildren will be in middle school as well. So I'll essentially just be stealing their lives and memorializing them as characters.
So in between books, do you ever take note of various things that your godchildren do that you think would work well in your books?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we already have something like 55 book ideas. So I'm expected to be writing about Boo and Chin, at least for the rest of my own life, according to my godkids. And so that's part of the reason I like the idea of chapter books because we can combine stories and have a longer arc for the characters and also give the series longevity for kids who maybe are reading them now as 5 or 6 year olds, but by the time they're like 10 or 11, they don't have to necessarily give up the books.
Let's get back to Scrappy Girl Project. What was the origin of that name?
So it's twofold. Scrappy Girl Project. And so the scrappy part, one has to do with picking up the pieces of yourself and creating a masterpiece. And so if you think of when sometimes an auto mechanic needs a part and a client can't afford maybe a new engine, they might go to like a scrapyard or a junkyard and grab a fairly new engine, for example. diesel at a fraction of the cost of a new engine and put it into the car and it'll run just like new, right? And so the idea, one, is being able to like pick those parts, kind of replace parts of yourself that are no longer working for you in a particular season of your life with a better version or a newer model so that you can keep moving forward, but also recognizing that like every single part of you is a masterpiece. So that's the first part. Girl, I'm a girl. And then project, it's twofold because on the one hand, we're all kind of always working on ourselves in some shape or form. Maybe we're not like focusing in on the same thing each time, but I think life is really about building on the last thing that you were doing or saying or being, and then project, as in project your voice. And so the cool thing about this name is, on the one hand, you can read it and think, oh, this person likes to fight, because I think that's usually the connotation that people gravitate to, is I'm a fighter. And yes, that is true, but it's more about the pieces than it is about the fighting, and realizing like the fight is not necessarily against others, but really against the old self that needs to make room for the new self, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I'm sure glad I asked that question, because my assumption had been scrappy in the more conventional sense of not necessarily being combative, but somebody who's resilient, pick themselves up when life knocks them down, has that fire in the belly to keep going forward, and they're scrappy. You talked about scrappy as being a mosaic.
I think personally, I am scrappy because if you look at my background, you'll see that. If you look at even choices that I've made, they're made in a way where people on the outside may be like, oh, what are you doing? That doesn't make sense, or that's crazy. But one of the things that keeps me going personally is I have a deep sense of self-preservation. I won't go out of my way to harm people, but I will go out of my way to protect myself if I need to. I create and have created a life where there's always an easy pivot for me, if that makes sense.
It does. And the sad reality is that we live in a society where that instinct of self-preservation is most acute for women. And so as the father of an adult daughter, I love hearing that you've incorporated that into your life. And it's sad that that has to be an important part of modern life, but it's a reality. So your company offers leadership development consulting services. Would that be an accurate way of portraying?
Right. That's right.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. And so what I do is, initially when I started out, I was working with kind of random types of companies. And so one of my first clients was a new philanthropist who was setting up a foundation and needed help kind of getting the bare bones together. And so I helped them with that. And then that built into more things. And so it was really, for me, it's like I could come in as a strategist and kind of help you on the ground with a very specific project you have in mind. And give you the type of leadership training as an individual that you might need to keep that project running after I'm no longer engaged. But the point of me starting the company was to provide leadership development training to senior leaders and organizations so that they could be positioned to do better mentorship and sponsorship, and be able to kind of identify traits in more junior people within their ranks who would be potential candidates for future leadership, rather than kind of using previous methods. Because as the world has seen, only certain types of people end up being in positions of authority in certain companies, right? Across the market. So you can look at every website and they all kind of look the same. And so it's helping with that, and without it being, this is like a diversity focus thing, and really focusing in on, well, these are key skills I need to be looking for in a person, not projecting onto them based on some arbitrary reason that has nothing to do with it. And so also crisis management, learning how to communicate with junior team members, but also how to communicate at the level that you are as well. Because I feel like that has been lost just in the 20 years that I've been working. I've done corporate retail work, but, I worked in academia for a while, and and was an attorney directly before starting this company. And the best leaders that I found were great communicators, and not in a like cheerleader type of way or shallow type of way where it's like you get that feel good and then it fizzles out. It was like these were leaders who inspired you to want to be more and encouraged you and guided you and developed you based on your natural talents and gifts, while also even the ones you weren't aware of. And so that's something I wanted to help other leaders be able to do.
Now you mentioned a commonality of characteristics that you see among people in various industries who are quote unquote successful leaders. What are some of those characteristics that you see that are predominant?
Well, in honor of Women's Heritage Month, I'll just come out and say most of the leadership are men. They all kind of look the same. They're mostly white men. And, frankly, even in academia, there's just at a certain level, once you get past middle management, it's probably 90% men in, the C-suite or at, managing director level. And then you may have one or two women or non-white people, but like it's kind of the core, right? And I think having that as the norm in 2025 is unacceptable, because when you look at the data, you have East Asians who are fully equipped and ready to do the work and not even getting the opportunities. You have Black people who, specifically Black women who, according to recent data, are the most educated, most qualified people for basically any job in any sector, just based on like the sheer amount of education. Like everyone has a PhD these days kind of thing. And still, when you look at those numbers and then you compare the dollars that they make as a result, it's abysmal as compared to their white male peers.
How much of that do you attribute to a conscious effort to exclude certain people versus the comfort of just perpetuating a system that people are already familiar with?
I think it's not a binary. I actually think it's both. I think on the one hand, people say that they want a different way. Like they say, I want my organization to look like the world I engage, but they're also enjoying the benefits of keeping their organizations the way that they have. Like there's like no true incentive. Business is still going well. There's still profitability. There isn't true accountability. While an employee might be able to sue an employer, for example, most employees don't pursue that because they don't want to be blacklisted from their industries. And so it gets to keep going the way that it does because no one is incentivized by speaking up about toxic cultures or toxic behaviors that are predominant. And I'll get really specific. I look at top 100 firms, for example, and many of those firms have diversity programs. But once they hire different types of people than their norm, there's no support available to them. They're not getting the same attention as their white counterparts. They're not getting the same type of sponsorship. They might get a lot of mentors, but they're not. They may do all the work on a deal or on a legal matter, but they're not being invited to the client dinner, whereas somebody who wasn't even working on the deal gets to go and meet their client. And I've seen that happen in my experience as an attorney. I think I was very lucky in some respects when I was going through my own experiences, and I just come from a mindset that it's important to speak up, even if there are things that could potentially impact me. And so I've always spoken up and always been vocal. But I think ultimately, too many times leaders have expected entry level people to come in and fix problems that have been going on in their systems for 100 years, 50 years. A new person or somebody who's 5 years into their career cannot possibly have the political and social capital needed to affect a change. And if the people who are in charge are saying they want something, they have to be the face of it. It can't be somebody who doesn't have power or authority to do it. And so that's something that I focus on in my training and development. I spend a lot of time on mindsets, and really breaking down why a leader doesn't feel comfortable voicing disagreement with some toxic behavior, even if they have the authority to do so with minimal impact. Because I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Why are you afraid if you are in a position to actually do the thing that needs to be done? Why are you afraid to do it? What's holding you back? And so on the one hand, I think what can be holding people back is this idea that oh, well, I'm the only one saying it. But I think part of the problem is everybody is being silent about what they truly believe and truly want. And everybody thinks they're the only one. And if everybody keeps silent, then you never know, oh, we actually have a critical mass of people that really want to get stuff done. That really want to make this change that we claim we want.
And getting back to an idea you touched on a moment ago, mentoring. Do you think it's important for a leader to be able to mentor others?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and I know you've seen this distinction between being a manager and being a leader. And I actually think it's semantics either way, because I think if you have the privilege of managing other people, it is your job, whether you think you're a leader or not, based on the weird distinction we've created between managing and leading. It is your responsibility to figure out who the people are on your team, either by asking them or doing assessments based on their work product, right? And training and developing them. For me, that's what mentorship is. I think that a lot of times people think mentoring is just having a feel-good conversation, but that's not it. It's if you are an organization and you have people in place that are running a department, they're running a team, the person who's leading the team needs to have the capacity to not only, I think most people are really good at bossing people around, but that's not your job as a manager. Your job as a manager, as a leader, is to actually train and develop your people so that they are empowered to do what it is you've hired them to do. And then continuing to train and develop them based on the goals that they've expressed to you, whether you can actually help them achieve their goal within your organization or you're setting them up to be able to land elsewhere and get that promotion that they're looking for. And that's, I would love to steal that idea and say it's mine, but I learned that from just paying attention to Richard Branson. He's one of my favorite CEOs because although he's a white man, he's been very open about his dyslexia and how he struggled kind of along the way. But something that he said years ago that really stuck to me was, one, treat your people well enough that they never want to leave, but train them well enough that they can work anywhere. And I think, unfortunately, that's not a methodology that's actually in place, and so there are many people, for example, during the pandemic, who started a job during the pandemic, and leaders failed to develop individuals and then blamed them for not being developed and the excuse was, oh, we're not in person. But so many other leaders were able to develop people through Zoom and by creating those connections. And so is it, we're not face to face, so I can't develop you? Or is it that I don't have the capacity to actually mentor and develop someone because either one, I don't really know what I'm doing and I've been making it up and getting away with it for this long, or two, it really just doesn't interest me. And I think it's more likely to. And I think if you're not interested in developing the next generation of leaders at your organization, you shouldn't be at leadership.
One of the paradoxes that I've encountered, and I've been an employment lawyer for over 25 years. I'm going to shave some of the years off there so as not to date myself from back in the days when they invented the wheel. But one of the things that I've heard expressed is just the frustration that some companies have of investing in the development of employees, and then they leave and go to a competitor and they feel somehow cheated. So it seems as if the second part of Branson's principle, to make your workplace someplace that somebody would never want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's really the challenge. Unfortunately, I think that there is a reluctance among some employers to put that investment into their own workforce because they're afraid that they're going to come out on the losing end of, the return investment.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that the employers that have that mindset, they're coming from a spirit of lack, coming from this mentality that almost like, if you think about it, it's a relationship, right? And I think what's really funny about the workplace is, on the one hand, a lot of companies want to talk about, oh, this is my family. But on the other hand, those same companies saying that create environments that people actually want to leave. So no matter how good and I'll give you an example, they will have a star player that maybe doesn't fit their norm, whatever that is. And I know there has been hyper focus on Black women and disabled people and the protected classes, right? I just think about the person who happens to be anomalous to who the people are that normally get promoted in a particular environment. And now that person shows up and they're doing really well. And instead of fostering that, the mindset is, oh, I don't want to train that person because they might leave. That doesn't make sense. They're already working hard for you, making you money, showing up and showing out, right? At the level that you've brought them in, like they're going above and beyond. And if the mindset is, this person is going above and beyond without me having put anything in their hands outside of like the check that I owe them for the work they've done, sometimes earning me 10 to 20 times more than I'm actually paying them. But I'm too worried about them leaving. So instead of engaging them to find out what they really want, what their goals really are, because I don't think you're necessarily going to train everybody to be a leader. It's like when I look at law firms, the expectation is not everybody's going to make partner. It's impossible. It will completely dilute the partnership. But if I know you want to work 5 years and maybe go in-house, for example, then I could be training and developing you along those lines. So maybe I'm making sure that you're a technically astute attorney, right? But if you're somebody who says, hey, I want to be partner, even if I can't guarantee that you will make partner in my firm because maybe it's lockstep or whatever, maybe there are just too many variables to worry about, I should be willing to give you the insight that you need to prepare yourself for the thing that you say that you wanted. And will there be people who change their mind? Well, yeah, because life happens, right? And sometimes you just got to go with where life is taking you. But I think if we actually take the time to find out what people truly desire for their careers and long-term for their lives, we don't have to worry about, oh, this person's going to leave, because 9 out of 10 times, if you create an environment where people feel safe, they're going to come to you and they're going to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And I'll say, like, that happened when I was working at my first firm. The second firm that I was thinking about going to, along with 3 other firms, they were courting me and telling me that they were going to give me the world. And I felt safe enough that I could go to one of my mentors at the firm that I was working at and say, hey, this is what's been going on. And I remember people telling me, oh, you should have never had that conversation with them. But when I felt safe enough, and I remember that partner, he was kind of like, hey, this sounds like a potentially good opportunity for you based on what we discussed about your long-term goals for your career. So I would pursue it, and push come to shove, you don't have to take the role. And so to me, this mentality of, oh, people are going to leave if I train them, so I'm not going to train them, is actually a disservice to an organization, because sometimes they don't leave. And in my opinion, do I want people working at my company who don't know what they're doing at year 5, year 7? So they're busy trying to highlight the mistakes of somebody who just started in their role because they're so worried about somebody figuring out they don't know what they're doing. I don't want that. Like, to me, we run the risk of having people stay who really don't know what they're doing. And that's a worse risk, in my opinion, than people leaving because they know what they're doing.
So in my experience, I feel that the role of mentorship in an organization is really undervalued. I can say from my own experience as an attorney, I can name 4 senior attorneys who took the time to be my mentor and who really shaped me during the formative years of my career. And I carry with me the lessons that I learned from them. But the one thing that I think some firms or organizations don't appreciate is, even if they invest the time in someone who ultimately leaves, the people who stay, the leaders, the senior people, actually develop good skills and become better at what they do by mentoring. The other thing that I point out to clients is free market takes care of a lot of these things. So if you coach somebody up and they now have a better skill set than when they started with you, and they leverage that for a higher paying job, you can just turn around and hire somebody from one of your competitors.
Exactly.
And you may end up having to pay more money to that person, but quite often it equals what you would have had to pay the person who left to get them to stay. There's a certain stasis or equilibrium if you look at it in a macro level. So do you encourage your clients to seek out their own mentors?
I do, because like I seek out mentorship, and although like I'm not currently practicing law, I still have an independent legal attorney that gives me advice about my legal career to this day. In fact, we're meeting in a couple of weeks, and like he's been with me since 2019. I've been getting advice from him as well. And I say independent because we haven't worked together since I was a summer associate. And so I think you have to find your mentor. Some of the time I've had I'm using luck, but I really mean blessings. I feel like I've always had a lot of people wanting to mentor me.
Enviable position.
Yeah. And for me, people always want to pour in. I've just always been in a position where people have been pouring into me since I was very young. But I took that for granted and thought like that was everybody's story. And I don't think that's everybody's story. And so I often tell people, if you see someone in your organization that has had a career or is having a career that like you envision for yourself, seek them out. Because 9 out of 10 times, because sometimes the really good people have a ton of people that rely on them, but most of the time they will make time for you. And your mentoring relationship can be whatever you make it, right? And so like I've had assigned mentors, and I control that relationship as well. In the law firm where I showed up with my action plans and my short-term and my long-term goals, and would just kind of knock out what I was doing. And sometimes I had mentors that were assigned who were like, oh my God, you're doing awesome. I'm going to push you forward for X. And sometimes I had assigned mentors that just weren't into it. and it wasn't, oh, they're not into you. It was, they're just not into mentoring, but that's something they have to do as part of their accountability as a manager. And so that's part of the reason I said, if you don't want to mentor the future of your organization, you probably shouldn't be in leadership. Be an individual contributor and let the people who actually want to train and develop the future of the company do the job.
The interesting thing that I've seen is that at least 2 of the 4 people whom I consider my very important mentors didn't necessarily see themselves as mentors at the time. They just kind of follow their instincts. And I have gotten back in touch with two of them, and I've been not overly effusive, but very open with how appreciative I was for their mentorship. And both times they were almost surprised.
No,
You
and
know, they're just
honestly,
following their.
those are the best mentors, Steve. They're the people who no one really knows that they've been mentoring you because they're not going around telling the universe they're your mentors. Like my independent mentor does not do that. I know that about him because that's just not his personality. But he has been a solid rock every step of my legal career. Even when I made the decision to take a sabbatical, we talked through what that would look like. And I think that we need people who are willing to kind of do it. I think some people are natural at it. You know, they naturally are nurturers, but I think that type of nurturing can be taught to leaders in an organization where if the expectation is they're going to do some type of mentoring or sponsorship of individuals in the organization and basically set up the successive leaders for that organization, then that's something I think that could be taught. Like this is how you do the job of mentoring, right? Ultimately, it's like you're a coach. I think about my field hockey coach. She wasn't necessarily showing us every step of the way what we needed to do, but there were moments in every season where we would have a light bulb go off because she said something profound that really glued the team together even more than we had been before, and that kind of thing. And I think that's what a leader needs to be. And it doesn't have to be this kind of formal, this is my action plan and all of that. Although I think if you're being strategic about pulling out future leaders for your company, at some point, there needs to be actual action planning happening so that once people get into a role where they're leading a team or leading a department or leading an entire region of your organization, they start prepared rather than feeling imposter syndrome or feeling ill-equipped because they haven't been trained and developed along the way. One of the things that I encourage organizations to do is have it be open to feedback. And I think a leader should be able to get open feedback.
Do you think that someone who has poor interpersonal skills can be developed into an effective leader?
I think so. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying offline. I actually believe if somebody wants to be better at anything, they can become better and they can actually become professional level at it. And the reason I believe that is I think about things that personally that I was not the best at. And I'll give you an example. I have a terrible poker face, which is a skill that is needed when you're doing business. You can't really have your heart on your sleeve. But my face, no matter how well I keep my tone in check and I kind of do all the other things, my face likes to just go off on a tangent doing whatever it feels like.
I'm glad that you said that because that was my initial reaction. She has a very poor poker face.
But you think about the words coming out of my mouth and you look at my face, it's kind of like, wait, she's really expressive. Even when she's saying the opposite of what she's thinking, like her brain is like literally making her face do things. And so over time, in certain settings, I have a really good poker face where people really don't know what I'm thinking besides what I'm saying to them. Like I'm hard to read. And I know I got better because I remember somebody that I worked with telling me, coming to my office one day and saying, you know, nothing seems to move you. You're just like so even temperament. And I kind of chuckled because that's not something people who actually know me would say. based on my face, because my face is always doing the thing. And so going back to what you said about interpersonal skills, I think it's easy to teach people how to communicate if they want to be better communicators. I think if a person wants to know how they can best reach their worst employee, they can be taught how to do that. Like, I think so. And I think it really boils down to showing people that they matter. I think somebody who's in leadership that may be a poor communicator, I'll use a yeller. There are people who think that you assert authority by yelling, but you actually get people to do more for you if they pay attention to what you're saying, and more people pay attention if you talk to them in a conversational way, as you and I are doing right now. When you start yelling, people start to tune you out. It's just a natural response. And so just teaching somebody how to express anger or disappointment without creating animosity between team members is a really important skill. And I think you can teach that if somebody actually wants to learn it.
Is the ability to speak before a large group something that you believe is important to be a successful leader?
It depends. I think if you are a leader of a major organization that's multinational and, you're in charge of 3,000 people, yes, it's important because at some point you're going to have to address your team. But I think if you're a leader of a mom and pop store with 5 employees, you don't need to be able to talk to a large crowd in order to effect the change that you need or to be a good leader, because within your sphere of influence, you only have like 4 or 5 people that you are managing and leading.
Can you tell us about your quantum lead programs that are part of the offerings of Scrappy Girl Project?
So I developed the Quantum Lead program because I wanted to create a system where people didn't just focus on technical skills, and really like show like the importance of having wholeness as a leader and really as an individual. Ultimately, I believe you can be the leader of your own life. And so the Quantum Lead framework is about creating the life that has the most harmony for you to achieve the purpose that you believe you've been placed on this earth to achieve. And so we spend time on spiritual wellness and, and making sure that there aren't any like soul wounds that you're nursing that could impact your mindset. And then we zero in on mindset and how having a mentality where whether it's like trauma that you've experienced as a child, trauma outside of the workplace that ends up bleeding into the workplace, trauma in your personal life that ends up bleeding into your academic success in school. And so we focus on just giving people the tools to heal. And although I don't label my company as faith-based because I don't want to alienate people, a lot of the principles that I move from come directly from the Bible, which frankly, every self-help book is just paraphrasing the Bible anyway, the ones that work anyway. And so we spend time both on professional development, but also personal development and focusing on the person as a whole rather than compartmentalizing, because a lot of times, and I know from my own experience with coaching, like I've had coaching while I was a manager in retail and also actually every step of the way I've had coaching. And there was always an overemphasis on the professional aspect of it with minimal consideration of the personal life. Although we pretend we can compartmentalize our lives, we really can't. Because we're one person where you can't leave half of yourself at home. And so teaching leaders how to bring their best selves into the workplace and help them come up with more inclusive ways of dealing with conflict in their workplaces, recognizing when a person might be having a personal issue that's impacting their professional work. But it's hard to do that second part without first showing them how it's unveiling in their own life, if that makes sense. And so we spend a lot of time on that. We also do personal financial wellness as well, because as a leader in organizations, you're responsible for a particular budget, whether it's like the budget for your payroll, like how much are you paying specific people on your team? Like, what is the cost of each individual, and staying under your budget? I think you have to start with the micro before you could do the macro. My mom always says, you can't lead others until you learn how to lead yourself. And I think that's really important. If I can't lead myself objectively, then I can't lead others objectively. If I don't have self-awareness, then I can potentially project things that really are about me onto the people I lead, rather than finding out the specifics about a person in a situation and leading from that space rather than my own ideas about a particular situation. So it's I hope that answers your question.
So we've reached that point in the program. Have you ever asked that one question too many?
All the time.
Can you give us some examples?
Several years ago, I was working with a partner who was always disappearing at one of the firms I worked at. I asked when's the best time for me to reach this person, because I had been trying during normal business hours and no time ever seemed to be the right time.
Presto, he would just vanish.
There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to reach this person. And the advice I got was, you can't reach them between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., but anytime after or before. And then I sent an email to like the group head where I asked this particular question. I've been trying to get a hold of this person. Is this person currently looking for a job because their behavior looks like something I've seen as a manager when people are actively looking for work? And they didn't like that. But 4 months later, that person left the firm. And you and I know that it doesn't take 4 months for a partner. It takes more time than to wind up. But I think that's why I became a lawyer, though, because I always ask those questions that people aren't supposed to ask, which is ultimately begging the question. That's literally what I do every single time.
We've been speaking today with Aubria Ralph, the founder of Scrappy Girl Project, which offers leadership development consulting services to organizations and individuals. Aubria, can you let our listeners know the best way to reach you?
Yes, you can find me at LinkedIn, just Aubria Ralph, first name Aubria. But you can also just visit the website, scrappygirlproject.com, and reach out if you'd like to schedule a goal talk, and we can, get started on your next big goal.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been really great talking with you, Steve.
Tune in for our next episode, where our guest will be Michael Graham, the founder and CEO of Graham Med Legal Research, LLC, in Vancouver, Washington. Production assistance for today's program was provided by John Palmar of Leadcast, LLC, and by Melissa Davis of the Theodoros Group, LLC. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast.